just as a form of introduction, I just wanted to make you all aware that I'm not a trained psychologist or trained in the clinical field. This is very much from my perspective of, like Sean said, so being in education, I trained in early childhood education, and I have been in education for 20 years. My experiences of working in football as a coach within the grassroots game, working with girls as a centre of excellence, and also working in the professional game. And more importantly, lived experience. So I became a young carer 22 years ago for my twin brother, along with my family, who unfortunately, through a series of traumatic events, when he was at school, he was really badly bullied. And as a result of that, he developed a mental health condition. And some of that is around depression, also schizophrenia. And what that experience has taught me is how fundamental it is as a coach, as a teacher, and as somebody who, along with my family, cares for somebody with mental illness, how imperative it is that we first of all think about what it looks like, and particularly when we're working with young people, things that we can do within our environments, and not being experts, but things that we can do as parents, as coaches, like I said, that we can put in place to allow young people to be able to have open dialogue and inform us of things that they're going through. Because in my brother's situation, we had absolutely no idea, and that trauma that he was going through, he built up and didn't speak out. And as a result, he actually, for the last 15 years, only has spoken to the voices that he hears, but cannot communicate verbally as we do. And this is somebody who, for 18 years of his life, I'll use the word normal, was a completely normal child. And if it can happen to my brother, then it can happen to anybody. So what I'm going to do is just talk through a definition around mental health and well-being, and then really look at what this looks like for us as coaches when we're working with young people, and possible solutions. So when we talk about mental health, there's a lot around mental health and well-being, and they're both entwined and crossover. So mental health really is looking at our emotional, psychological, and social well-being. And well-being for young people, what we do know is it will be positive and negative, and young children will go through a whole, just like adults, a whole roller coaster of emotions. Sometimes they'll be, buzzing around and feeling excited and really happy, and at other times they might be feeling sad. So when we talk about well-being, in a nutshell, it describes a wider set of feelings and thoughts that influence how we behave day to day. So what we think, what we feel, and how we act. And as I mentioned with the story around my brother, what it does do is determine how we manage and tolerate adversities and stress, and this and how we're feeling in that situation ultimately will impact and affect the choices that we make, and how we react to certain adversities. I wanted to show you this. So I completed, and I'll signpost you to this at the end of the presentation, a course developed by UK Coaching on mental health, and they term this a mental health continuum. And it's if we just reflect upon the feelings around how we what I said in the previous slide with well-being, sometimes young people will be feeling positive, and sometimes they may be on the latter end of the continuum. So just going back to the things, the contributing factors will be determined very much by how they are able to have the resilience and to have the determination around and the growth mindset on how they manage these feelings. So they will be at any end of this continuum at any point in their lives. And I'm going to go into during this presentation factors that we might need to consider as coaches, particularly around COVID-19 and some of the impact that that would have had on the young people that we work with. So what does this look like for children? I looked into that. There's several research that I'll signpost you to at the end with regards to statistics within the US, and some quite alarming. Some you may feel that actually we knew this. 1 in 6 children will have diagnosable mental health condition across the United States. So approximately from 74.5 million children, it's an estimated 17.1 that will have a psychiatric disorder. And we're looking at almost half of those will have a diagnosable mental health condition before they are the age of 18. So if you think about and reflect upon what that looks like for you within your group, that's a considerable amount. The most common, some of these you may, looking at the makeup of your group, you may feel actually, yes, we know this already. So the most common mental health disorders in children are anxiety, ADHD, and depression. So when we look at anxiety, it's feelings of worry, particularly around uncertainty. And if we think about the pandemic and how and what that looks like for young people, that's definitely definitely one to consider. Feelings of nervousness, depression, if we refer back to the mental health continuum, what we do know is young people again will have good and bad feelings, and that's completely okay, and that'd be no different to adults. So we know that children will feel happy, and at other times they're going to feel sad and upset. But it's the manifestation of these feelings that can lead to a mental health condition. So it's if they are unable to manage stress, manage adversity, and if they do not have enough resources within their toolbox, and we'll talk about things that we can do as coaches or as people who work with or as young, as professionals who work with young people, and what we can do to help players to increase their toolbox in helping them manage these levels of stress. So with depression, like I said, is a manifestation of these negative emotions, and the young people feeling as though these feelings will linger or go over a period of time because they are unable to manage how they are feeling. And ADHD, impulsiveness, hyperactivity, young people perhaps having a short concentration span and acting without thinking. So they may not have the ability to reason and rationalize as we do. So now thinking about the pandemic and the impact that the contributing factors on what can impact the players that you or we are working with. So a number of them, say the majority of them, would have been out of school for a period of time. And I mean, I'm not quite sure how it works in the US, but in the UK, we have key worker children, so those parents who may be teachers, who may work for the NHS, who have key jobs, those children who might be vulnerable, those have been allowed to go into school in the duration. But what the school environment looks like is very different to what they have been used to. As a result, a lot of the young people, as we know, and I'm some of you who are parents will know, have been bringing work home or have been sent work electronically from the teachers at school. And some of you may have been involved in a lot of homeschooling, and just this change of environment can cause anxiety and a feeling of uncertainty for the young people. So as well as them being on this emotional roller coaster, or as well as, you know, or linking it back to the mental health continuum, and them being feeling positive about their emotions and how they're feeling, to now maybe being in the middle part of not quite sure what's going on, their learning has also been affected, because as much as as much as parents and carers and the young people themselves have been very active and proactive in ensuring that the work gets done at home, it's very different to being in a school environment, and that would be no different for them being in our environment or your environment as coaches. So as well as the disruption in learning, there's also a disruption in their routine, and for young people who like structure at the moment, it's been a very difficult time for them and their families in helping to maintain this, particularly because of the duration of how long it is. Some of them may have had the opportunity and may also have access to technology, so they can keep in contact with their friends and their family via Zoom, via FaceTime, and video calling, whereas not all young people will have this access. So some of them, as well as being able to see their friends through video calling, and again, this is very different to, I'm sure, them being able to, you know, speak to their friends face to face, that they may not have had any access to that, and then they're also going to be missing their friends at school, in addition to their group at the club. Now, there's been some fantastic work being done by people to help young people engage in physical exercise, and it's well known that physical exercise can impact on positive, you know, emotions and endorphins, and ultimately impact on our well-being and relate to positive mental health. But there's also a consideration for young people actually who may not have access to space, which I'll come on to, that other children may have. Therefore, us being creative, and I'm sure that, you know, there are coaches who are doing this already, coaches being creative and innovative on how to help all young people, so we talk about inclusion, feel integrated within the program, because some who may, you know, live in a flat, may not have access to you know, the grass area and the green area that others do. Now, what I also understand is as we're progressing through the pandemic, rules, you know, the regulations are continuously changing. So this is by no means me saying that this is exactly what it is as we evolve over time, some of these contributing factors may become less, and then some of them you may find actually we need to consider this a little bit more. With you know, it's great that there are some young people, again, just like with the learning aspect, who have access to technology and communications. We have some, you know, who are fortunate enough to ensure that they have good nutrition. However, what we also have to be mindful of the fact is that there are some vulnerable children, and that there will be also many adults now who are out of work, and as a result of that, what we do know is that there, you know, in terms of being able to even afford to have good nutrition, it's becoming very challenging for families. So if we think about some of their family circumstance, each individual circumstance is going to be very different, and in how we look at each individual child or player, this will be no different to what we do when we're thinking about when we work with them, looking at them technically or tactically. This really, for me, is about, is almost saying, how do we now have a greater lens on the psychosocial, and think about how we might individualize some of our programs, bearing in mind the needs of the players that we have in our group, and some of the and thinking about some of these contributing factors within that. Some of them may have gone through bereavement, particularly around COVID-19, and this could be immediate within their home, but this could also be friends or extended family members. So there's many factors that you may have thought about already, but certainly what we do know is that when the young people do come back to us within our groups and we actually start coaching on the field, there's a lot that we're going to need to consider, particularly around their feelings and their emotions. And if we think about this mental health jigsaw, what we do know is that along the mental health continuum, they're going to be up and down in relation to how they're feeling at any given time, determined by what they're going through as a result of the pandemic. So sometimes they might be feeling excited, sometimes they might be showing anxiety. For some, they might be fearful, and I'm going to come on to signs and symptoms. For others, that might be the complete opposite. So just like with us as adults, it's just really being mindful and consider, when we're thinking about the individual needs of the player, that not all of us will feel and think and behave in the same way. And how we react to a particular situation doesn't mean to say that another player or another child will react in the same way. So in the UK, so I sat on a steering group with the Football Association, and we helped produce along with colleagues, a guidance, and I'll signpost you to that at the end. And some of this has been taken from that, it's mental health guidance taken from that. So when we're thinking about as coaches, because again, we're not the experts, and what we're not expected to do is to be able to know exactly when to make a referral. What we are as professionals, as coaches, expected to do, or to become better equipped in doing, is being able to observe and notice and think about where we now concentrate or pay more attention to with regards to what we notice when it comes to how children feel, how they behave, and how they act, and when it becomes a cause for concern. So if you notice over a period of time that a child who once attended all your sessions now is, that their attendance is a little bit up and down, you may notice that they're not feeling as motivated as they might have done before. You may see that they're now on the peripheral, whereas this before was a player who actually would be very energetic and not an introvert, and actually be somebody who's quite involved. If you start noticing these things over time, it's not to say that there is a cause for concern immediately, but what you will definitely acknowledge is that actually there's definitely a disruption or a change in their behavior patterns. Therefore, that might be a conversation with, as well as the coach that you might be working with, it's a conversation with the welfare officer, a safeguarding lead, or a psychologist if you have that within your club. So as well as looking for symptoms of withdrawal, things that may be out of character. So you will know your players better than anybody. So you will know if there is a disruption or a change in how they're behaving. And that's not just towards you or other members of staff. It might be how they're behaving towards their friends and their peers. And any changes in weight, are they neglecting their self-care? Are there any changes in their appearance? And I've termed this under the eye, but what it is they're things that we cannot see so easily. So what I mean by that is things that are not so obvious. Now that might be suicidal thoughts, that might be thoughts around self-harm, it could be anxiety, eating disorders. Anxiety can also be related to fear. It may be the fear of coming back to training. It might be the fear that perhaps they haven't been able to practice or train as much, and the fear of not being able to perform as well as the others, or not being able to perform like they were when they left you before the pandemic. So therefore not feeling good enough, feeling worthless, and perhaps feeling disappointed within themselves. So things that we, like I said, things that may not be so obvious on the eye are almost the hardest to notice, but the better we become equipped with observing, the better, the more knowledgeable we become on actually what do we need to look for. I'm going to talk about the learning environment. The more we create a learning environment that actually promotes open dialogue, it allows players to express and talk about how they feel. It encourages positive relationships. The more the children will come and speak to you, and the more we can be in a better position to be able to signpost if we need to. So it's just considering what your current learning environment looks like, bearing in mind the contributing factors around COVID-19 and the potential impact that it can have on the players that you have. So we think that this character, I've named this character Jasmine in my book, and we think about we think about Jasmine and how Jasmine is feeling. That may be no different to how a player within your group is feeling in the duration of this time. And we talk about being able to manage these feelings. I've looked at resilience, but in the context of the pandemic and potentially what the children might be going through. So looking at our learning environment and how we manage that as coaches, and looking at our learning processes and what we do to allow players to develop resilience, but in the process of finding healthy ways to adapt and cope with adverse situations, with distress, particularly around the pandemic and what those players might be going through. And the more we can do that, the more we can help the players be able to be resourceful, be able to find different ways in which to manage within adversities or manage within challenges. But in order for them to do that, what we need to do is to create a greater toolbox. So this toolbox is more than just about what are they like technically or tactically. This toolbox is actually around their mindset. So it's how can we help them grow their mind to allow them to understand the processes of learning. And if we can do that, developing resilience is part of that. So I followed, when I was teaching and still currently, I follow a lot of work by Guy Claxton, who works in education, and Guy Claxton has a model called the 6 R's of learning. So I adapted that to the 5 R's. However, resilience is part of that. Resourcefulness is also part of that. Responsibility is part of that. And if we think about what a resourceful learner looks like, a resourceful learner is somebody who is able to almost pick and choose, just like we may do as adults, the tools that they need and the tools that are best to help them learn in any given context. And this will look different depending on what it might be. Now, if we can help the players increase their toolbox, they will be able to better manage how they are feeling coming back into the environment and then beyond. Because ultimately what we want the young people to do is to be lifelong learners. We want them to be able to not just be learners of the game, but actually be learners for life. So considerations around what helping hands can we create, or can you create as coaches in helping the players to cope and adapt. And some of that could look like this. So thinking about how you reframe negative thoughts and help them to identify a positive situation. And a lot of this is around growth mindset. So can we help the players in using this experience as a, what can we learn from this? So turning something negative into something positive. Helping the players problem solve, again, is about a learner being resourceful and finding different ways to solve a problem or to overcome challenges. Can we encourage imagery and visualization, which could quite simply just look like them picturing and imagining, scoring a goal, imagining beating a player, or whatever it looks like to them. But the more they imagine it, that can then lead on to, okay, what tools do you need to allow you to do that? Now, can you imagine that? And that again is linking back to creating a greater toolbox in allowing them to problem solve, and then in turn, hopefully, allowing them to develop greater resilience in overcoming challenges. Are there any role models that you could use that are pertinent to the young people you work with? I'm sure you're doing this already, but work on relationships with the young people and build that trust. And all they're going to want to do when they come back to train is want to play and want to want to enjoy time with their friends. So this building trust and having the empathy, in addition to linking it to your learning environment, is also going to be around what your practice looks like, and does it allow does it have considerations? Have you thought about the contributing factors of COVID-19 and the impact that that's going to have on your practice design, particularly when the young people come back to you, bearing in mind that they wouldn't have trained for a considerable amount of time, probably a lot longer than what the off season might be. Positive learning environment, the young people enjoy we all, not just young people, as adults, we enjoy laughing and value in humor. What they may be out of routine, so when they come back to you now, what the structure and the routine looks like, and ensuring there is open dialogue and encouraging that, so that the young people feel comfortable in being able to talk and speak to you, listening to what they have to say, providing reassurance, and being patient, because what we do know is that things take time, and this is not going to be an easy fix. This is something that they, plus some, the adults, wouldn't have experienced in our lifetime. So I think there is a lot to take away from this experience and the impact that it will have on the players that we work with. So it's going to be crucial that we remain patient within the process. And I'm going to end on some signposting. So some of the information I have gained from the FA Mental Health Guidance. This is actually a PDF which anybody can download across the world, and it's not just specific to the English FA. It can be applicable to anybody working with young people, and it provides a great tool and guidance for us as coaches, as parents, as youth professionals, in what to look for when we have the young people with us in relation to well-being and mental health. Specific to the US, there's the Centers for Disease Control and Prevention, and sorry, I'm not quite sure how. And it's now not going back to the other slide. Sean, sorry, it's not going back to the other slide.
Okay, I'll ask you a couple of questions while we're going through it. We had a couple of questions come in already, and
Okay.
I had a couple too. So write them across, and then we can try and redig it as well and see if it comes across in the meantime. I guess
oh, it's now.
Oh, you got it? Okay, perfect.
Sorry, yeah, it was so. There's two sites in particular that in terms of the statistics that relate to the US. So the Centers for Disease Control and Prevention and the Child Mind Institute, and that has a lot more stats for those of you who are keen and interested, particularly around the number of young people who would be diagnosed with ADHD and other behavioural conditions, with depression and anxiety. Some of the resources and the pictures that you saw have been taken from my book, Child in Mind, and I've just left my contacts up there. Thanks, Sean.
Perfect. Thanks, Manisha. Yeah, so we had a couple of questions come in already. If you guys have any other questions, I think this is a really interesting topic in terms of our greater understanding of how to tailor our behaviour and our understanding of other people's behaviour, even not just the kids, but our other coaches as well. So I guess a question for you from me, Manisha. How has this whole process informed your coaching approach? Is it become more geared towards that player first and everything else streams second from that? And has that been something that you've seen to be implemented across QPR and I guess wherever you've coached or been involved?
Well, I think because of my experiences, I've always seen myself, I come from education first before football. And I think because of my training and because of my experiences of working in primary schools with young people, that pedagogy, and I get that ethos and those values, when I started coaching, that was very much, that underpinned my philosophy on what I feel coaching looks like. So with regards to some of the contributing factors around the pandemic, if we as coaches have a philosophy around, like you said, child first. So if we have a philosophy that is that is there to meet the individual needs of the child, and our ego comes from developing the child, as opposed to creating a session plan that's for us. Who is the session? The practice design should be around the benefit of the child, and this, whether it's the site social, it is around the thinking, and around the learning and how children and how players learn. And if we can have a greater emphasis around the learning aspect, around the learning process, they can then flourish in the football aspect, because the more they understand how to learn, the more that they can accelerate in what it is that they're learning. And that is whether it's football, whether it's English or maths or whatever it might be. So I think what the pandemic has done is certainly brought to light some factors that maybe, me included, that we haven't thought about. And certainly because the young people have been out of football for a considerable amount of time, I think there's going to be, I think there'll be challenges around practice design and what that looks like, and actually what coaches do to ensure that when the young people do come back, that there's a transition that is focused around the child and bearing in mind what they would have gone through.
But you mentioned ego there. In my experience, and I guess probably a lot of other coaches' experience, that this can be a very ego-driven industry in terms of wins and losses, competitions, tournaments, and we've seen a real shift. I mean, hopefully that's kind of one of the ways in which I've seen this be really beneficial, is a shift into thinking of person first, person first in a coaching standpoint as well when dealing and working with people. But when you come across, or I guess encounter people who have struggled to grasp that concept, do you have any, I guess, specific advice you would give to those, or anything that you can show them that would really benefit them in terms of their understanding from a coaching standpoint of this benefit of this in terms of participation, engagement, motivation of the players?
So I think, so first, I think there's, it's to challenge your own thought process in what arena are you working with, as my head of coaching, Chris Ramsey at QPR calls it, because what arena are you working in? So if you're working with young people, you are in the development arena, and we are there to develop the players. Now, we want to teach the young people to be able to compete, but being able to compete and being able to win, in my opinion, are two different things. Now, through being able to compete, they may win, but they may not. But they'll certainly be learning and developing as learners through any of that process. So when you're thinking, as you know, as the coach, talk about the ego, that it's thinking about, it's challenging, where does your ego lie? And it's actually challenging your own thought process and your own values, and actually thinking about, who are you doing this for and why are you doing it? And you'll be able to answer that yourself as a coach. And it's about being honest. If we want the young people to be honest about where they are in their stage of learning, then ultimately we need to do that ourselves. So if we can be honest and have greater emotional intelligence around where we are in our thought process around why we're coaching, who we're coaching, and again the why around why are we doing it, if that answer is around actually it's to develop the players, that's fantastic and that's great. If the answer is around I want to win, and then that ego needs to be challenged, because it's then asking the question for you as a coach is, are you in the right arena? Because it's not to say that you're thinking it's wrong, it's just that that might not be right for the arena that you're working in. And if you're working in, with the first team and where results matter, then that might be completely different. However, if you're working with young people and it's about the development of the child, and your ego needs to be around the process of the development as opposed to winning. So I would definitely be saying to the coaches is challenge your own thought process and ask yourself the question on why are you doing this and who are you doing it for, and you yourself will know the answer to that.
Perfect. I had a couple of questions coming in now in the meantime, so I'll fire them across to you as well. Laurie's asked, how do you feel that coaches deal with mental health who might also be out of a job but still need to provide for their family at this time? For example, a delivery driver who worked in football full-time for many years, is motivation a factor there? And how can we support that as teammates, colleagues, peers, whoever,
So I think that the same, with regard to the young people, with what I've shared, the only difference is that's those statistics related to young people. But in essence, the philosophy around what we're talking about is applicable to adults as well. And what we do know is there's still a real taboo around mental health, and being able to be open about talking about mental health. So in order to eradicate this taboo, I think what we also need to think about is that mental health isn't just negative, it's also about positive well-being, because ultimately well-being is about feelings and how we behave and how we act, and it should be encompassed within our culture and our day-to-day lives and how we lead our life. So if there are adults, be it a friend, be it a colleague, that may be experiencing a low in their mood or in how they're feeling, what we don't want to do is straight away label that they have a mental health condition. So there, if it's a case where, and we know this, that at the moment, it's unfortunate and it's on the rise with regards to the unemployment and how many people are losing their jobs or going to be made redundant if they haven't already. There's a lot of uncertainty, even for those who are currently in jobs, with regards to, okay, well, I'm on leave now, what might that look like in a month or a couple of months' time? If businesses are not making money, how can they sustain themselves to be able to keep paying staff? So we know that whether somebody's in a job or not, that there is a real time of uncertainty, just like with the roller coaster diagram that I showed, the mental health continuum that I referred to, that is no different to adults. And it's very much just going back to the basics, because we are not the professionals and we are not the experts, is picking up the phone, you okay? You know, that kind of thing. And if with adults, it's slightly different to how we, when we're managing with young people. So with adults, ultimately, what we can't do is put upon them that they should go and seek help. If we feel that there is a cause for concern, and if we feel actually this is something that they do need. Because once you're over 18, ultimately the decision is upon the person. But what we do need to do is, I'll go back to the science, is be knowledgeable and upskill ourselves on what to notice. And the more we can become better at thinking about what to notice and what these signs might look like, then we can be in a better place to actually help our friends and help colleagues, because we can be open with dialogue, build greater relationships, build the element of trust so they come and speak to us, and advise but not impose ideas.
You mentioned that mental health is still, seen as a taboo, and a lot of people are afraid to talk about it. A lot of people are uncomfortable talking about it. In terms of, from an organisational standpoint, be that as a professional academy, college, youth football club, do you think having some form of mental skills framework in place can help negate the need for, I guess, that much discussion, direct discussion on the topic? If we can put in touch using sports psychology tips and frameworks to maybe add guided discovery through the mental health and mental skills process, will make it a more open topic, I guess, is how we would look at it.
Yeah, absolutely. Because if we're at the club, so at QPR, with our psych, what Chris designed was our psychosocial model. Underpins everything else. It's the biggest part. He calls it the egg, but it's the biggest part of our philosophy. And that could encompass mental skills, but in essence, it's about developing and nurturing mental capacity or mental capabilities in allowing the players to work things out and overcome challenges. So that now we're going back to how can we develop greater resilience and develop their mental capacity. That doesn't need to be a standalone topic, and I feel that particularly think about my time in teaching, and it certainly shouldn't be, because it then just becomes a session. We're going to talk about anxiety. Okay, we're going to now do a session on depression or whatever it might be. What we need to do is actually is to draw upon experts if you don't have that within your be honest about what we know and what we don't know. Draw upon the experts that we can lean on. So that could be performance psychologists, that could be teachers, it could be people from the sports science background, that could be medical practitioners who can best advise in helping to build a philosophy that also encompasses the football journey, because I think it's also us going back to and recognising why are the players there. So within the professional game, the players are there with a dream to become footballers, ultimately. And underneath that, as we know statistically, not all of them, the very few will make it. It's about having a philosophy that says, actually, this is our long-term goal. We want as many players to develop into the first team. However, what we also want is to develop adaptable players who can withstand and overcome adversity and prepare them for life. So that might be playing abroad, that might be playing in other salaried football, that might actually not be a job in football, that might be having a career in something else. So I think that there is a lot to be said around Do we talk about reflecting on your ego, reflecting on yourself, but also about reflecting on your philosophy, and what does that look like? And does your philosophy encompass and pay attention to psychosocial? There's a lot of talk around psychosocial at the moment, and like I said, I don't believe that these mental health is not, it should not be, it's not an isolated topic, because mental health should be seen as part of our culture and how we lead our lives every day. So I think if we can break this taboo about what mental health looks like and what well-being looks like, and actually start seeing it as mental capacity, being able to withstand and overcome adversities and challenges, being able to manage how we feel in a given situation, being able to manage how we act and behave, and have the tools in order to do that. To have the tools, you need a philosophy that provides the child or the player with this toolbox. So if we can do that, then we will have players who are able to better manage in these situations. So I think fundamentally, we as coaches, go back to your philosophy and actually question and dissect, what does that look like?
When you mentioned, QPR, I guess the base, the foundation is centered around the psychosocial aspect. So if you're trying to instill a theme for a session, for example, like you mentioned, resilience or adaptability, would that be through the basis of the creation of challenges within that, rather than sitting the kids down and talking them through, this is what we're doing, that you instead create the environment that develops the challenge and the ability for them to problem solve with that as an aspect, a key aspect of what you're trying to bring out from that, in that respect?
Yeah, so within the way that Chris has designed our practices, we don't do themes. So we wouldn't do a passing theme, or we don't do a resilience theme. What we ultimately, it's based on our practices are designed on the principles of play. And then what we do is we'll have an emphasis, but the emphasis is determined by the individual needs of the player. So it will depend on what the player's individual learning plan is with regards to what we emphasize on within the session. However, we're talking about, with what you said with regards to, like, for example, if it's to developing the resilience or the mental capacity or mental capabilities, that would be ingrained within the session. And then what that looks like for the individuals would be determined by what we call it the ILP, what their ILP looks like. But also, sorry, just adding to that, as well as the philosophy, it's also encompassed within our values. So the question to be asked then would be, what does your philosophy look like? And does your philosophy encompass looking at the psychosocial area of a player? And is that aligned to your core values? Because then as you're coaching, it'd be no different to when I was teaching. It's continuing to make references, because ultimately the players are like sponges, and they want to learn. So the more we reference, so as an example, if one of your core values at the club is around sharing or responsibility, and you've seen that within the session, then what we want to do is to be more open around going back to what we notice and what we concentrate on. I really like the way that you were helping out such and such with understanding. So it's not, oh yeah, that was great work tracking back, or that was, it's thinking, it's being more open-minded around what we notice. And like I said, I understand that we want players to be able to compete, and we want to develop technically adept players. We want to be able to do that. What we also want to be able to do, though, is to develop a player holistically. And as part of that, they need to be able to think. So we need, if we want to develop thinkers and adaptable learners, it's also important that we help them to create this mind that allows them to do that. So the more we can reference the philosophy to the players, the more we can reference your core values of the club to the players, and that they're in sync and aligned, the players will just learn to pick those things up. But I think that it's one is your philosophy and one is your core values. And then it should be, then the next part of that, of course, is who is aware of it? Are the players aware of it? Are the parents aware of it? Are the coaches aware of it? You know, so because then it becomes a whole, it's a collective.
And from that point, when about development of core values as an organisation, and like you said, sharing them with the interested parties, players, all coaches, parents. There's obviously a school of thought that looks at culture as based around behaviours, and the process of having those behaviours aligned with your core values is the way that you will determine the actual success of the process, because people can say something, but their behaviour can dictate and demonstrate something else. But in terms of how do you involve the players and the parents, especially for clubs that may be outside of the professional sphere where they have to navigate that a little bit more than you would normally in a professional academy environment, to have them engaged and involved in that process so that they're, you know, really incentivized to participate, you know?
So when I worked, I'll give you two examples. So one of, I worked at, and I linked them both. So when I worked in a grassroots club, and when I worked at a girls' centre of excellence. So the first thing was actually it's as a club, and this is, you know, you don't have to be in the professional game to do this, is actually say, what are our values as a club? And once you have that, the next part, what I did was with the players, I got the players together, and I just spent some time and I spoke to them about it and I shared it. And then what I did was I created this, and it was really basic, on an A3 piece of paper. You know, I had colours, and I said to them, right, what we're going to do is we're going to create our own values charter. And what they did was they went, so I spoke to them about what it could look like. They came up with some ideas, and you know, one of them said, being respectful, bringing your equipment, having your shin pad, all that kind of, whatever it meant for the player. And then what I did was I got them to go away at home. They drew pictures and then they brought it back. I then I stuck their pictures in, you know, made it look nice, and I laminated it. And each age group, so I did this at the grassroots club, and then when I was working at the Girls Centre of Excellence, in my last season, I was centre manager. That very process, I then, with our technical director, implemented it across all age groups, where it was getting whether you're an under 9 or an under 17, you're going to have your values charter, and then it was getting them to sign it, and it was in educating them on the importance of, now that you've signed this, what does that mean? It gives them accountability. So if you've said you're going to, you know, show respect, but, you know, what would happen if this doesn't happen? And then what the next part of the process was, because you're talking about creating the values charter, then we got to work on embedding it. But as part of the creating, it was, okay, well, what would be the consequences? What do you want the consequences to look like? Because we are then developing the mental capacity to be able to, you know, with regards to problem solving, but it's also about taking ownership and developing this responsibility. So that they came up with what they feel the sanctions should be, and because they had signed it, what we said to all the age group coaches, myself and the technical director, was that actually we need to now enforce it. So, and that can be a challenge for coaches, because sometimes you're tired, you've been at it so many times, you're working part-time, you've come back, you know, you're now having to do this session that you've rushed into, and to keep reinforcing can be a challenge. But we need to keep doing that, because the moment the players know that, oh, it doesn't matter, I've done this before, and he or she has never said anything, that they'll know that, and they know that it was just a piece of paper for the sake of it being a piece of paper. So as well as the creating and doing it in collaboration, it's making sure that it's then reinforced, and we keep going back to that charter. And it then has to be shared with the parents. So we did it over a meeting. We got all the parents together and we said, this is what we're doing, you know, and some parents bought in, but some didn't. But if I'm honest, you know, it'd be no different to any other organisation. We will not get everybody to buy into all the ideas. So what we have to do is to be firm as people in a position of influence, or as people in a position of being in charge. We have to be confident in what we're offering, and we have to acknowledge that actually what we're offering has value and it will have an impact on the child. Some will buy into that and some will not. For those that don't buy into it, we cannot force them, but what we can do is give them a choice. So it may be that parents decide actually this environment isn't for them. That's completely fine. And I think that what we shouldn't do is feel is almost feel sad or guilty about that, providing we feel we have done the best thing that there is for their child. So everything should always go back to is how confident are you in what you're offering? And that confidence will come from knowing and acknowledging that what you're offering is the best for their child. And I think it's always going back to and reinforcing that we're doing this with the best interest of your child.
When you looked at this across the age group, did every age group have a slightly different charter, or was it the same across all of the age groups that was then signed? Because obviously getting that consistency across the groups, you know, families who may have siblings in there that have a different behavioural standards and charters for each age group, was that a challenge, or did you have consistency across all the club?
What we kept consistent was initially what the club values. So the club values were consistent, and what we asked of the players wasn't to change the club values, but was to decide and make a decision on what it looked like for them. So the core of, like, the primary values were consistent throughout, but it's what it looks like for somebody who was 9. It looks slightly different for somebody who was 15. Like so for instance, one of the values was responsibility. To an under 15, the aspect of responsibility looked different to the 9-year-old. So I think it's important that there is consistency, particularly because I just think you need a consistent method throughout the club, whether it's with your practices, whether it's with, you know, and especially more so with your beliefs, because ultimately, if you have the players coming in and you want them progressing with you over a period of time, if you have a player and I'm the under 10s coach and you've passed them on to me, my values can't be different to your values, because it'd be no different to a school. You know, if you have a child who's in like the first grade or year 1, and I haven't taught them a subject that they need for year 2, I would have to look at myself. So I think that you need to have I think there needs to be consistency, but it goes back to what does it look like for the individual needs of the child or the player, and what it looks like for them will be different. But what we need to do is ensure that the core values are consistent. That's no different to a practice, because that's, you know, your core practice is going to look the same, but what each player gets out of it will be different, because that will be determined by their individual program.
Yeah, I actually 100% agree. And my organisation, what we've been putting together is that very similar process. We had 3 core values that we wanted to develop a culture around, and then it's just determining the behaviours that align with that specific quality. I mean, as that we had with humility, respect, and commitment to development. So then it's, as you mentioned, an 8-year-old and a 15-year-old have very different understandings of what that behaviour looks like in each of those areas, and what the standard should be is on a scale of educational development as well. So I think it's really important that we have that engagement and buy-in from the group, because otherwise it becomes dictatorial, and it's the best way to remove motivation for the players to participate in it. And that's what we've seen. And it's been a real big change. I think mental health considerations and psychosocial considerations have formed a much greater backbone for what we're trying to do. Something that I've been very interested in personally, which has kind of driven it, which has helped. But I agree 100%. I think we need to make sure that the players, the families are engaged in this process. And we have a similar situation. We've had families where we've told them, you know, this isn't going to be for everyone. We're asking a lot of you because we believe that this educational environment demands it. And if you're looking for something more recreational, there's another place you can go for that. But we have strong beliefs in these core values and this culture of commitment that we're looking to create. And there's going to be standards that need to be, you know, both understood and enforced, as well as ensuring that the players understand that as well. But here in the US, it's very much a different environment because the parents are more invested financially in the process. So that management can be very difficult. And that's actually one of the questions we had. It kind of deals with parents' behavior. Andrew's asked, how do you deal with parents who are either in denial or become overly frustrated when it comes to discussing their child's behavior and trying to engage with the parents? If it's like a younger kid, then they're up to your first port of call.
So what we've so strategies that have been put in place at QPR, but also it has been no different to some of the other clubs that I've been in, so including the Grassroots Club. So we're sharing what our values are and what that looks like on a match day. Now we're training when I was working in the Grassroots game at Middlesex at the Girls Centre, the parents were allowed to watch. Now in the club in a professional game, I can only go on my experience at QPR. The parents are only allowed to watch training. There's one training session on the Saturday they're allowed to watch. They're not allowed to watch the other training sessions, and they're allowed to watch games. However, we've been firm, and like I said, it was no different, this approach, and similar to what you said, Sean, about the values and how you've implemented the values, firm with conduct and parent conduct. So in terms of the values charter, really in essence, for me, the values charter was actually what's the child's version of their code of conduct. That's no different for the parents. So during the beginning of the season, all the parents were given a meeting and informed on what the what their code of conduct is and what the consequences of that would be. And when I was working in the Grassroots Club, there were respect from the FA. We were able to get the respect barriers and, you know, to help reinforce the message of what we wanted. And it really meant, and it was challenging for the coaches, but what it did mean was you had to be firm with the message. And what you had to do was, if you heard parents shouting at their child during a game, and those messages were inconsistent with our philosophy and our values, there were several things that that we had decided, and this was across the board. So this is not just a QPR, but I'm going to now share across the board. The child would come off, and there can be mixed opinions on this with regards to the child being punished. But one of the strategy was consideration around, is the decision made that the child comes off for a few minutes until the parent acknowledges? Do you remind the parent that, no, you know, there's been times where we've stopped the game and have just not isolated a parent, but just said the game will continue if we can adhere to, but just a reminder that our code of conduct for parents is blah, 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 or whatever it might be. So we've stopped the game and given the reminder. There's been times where I have, on an away game, the game hasn't been stopped, and I've gone round, and the assistant coach has then been managing the game. I've gone round to the parents and just, you know, reiterated that these are our values, and if this continues, your child will come off, as you are aware of what our process is. And there's then been times thereafter where, you know, the child has come off for a few minutes. then come back on. The parent has then stopped, and you know, most of the time the parents have apologized. But there will be times where they may not apologize, and they may be adamant in how they view view the behaviors, or view what they perceive football to be, you know, how they want their child to play football, which may not adhere to your philosophy. So in those circumstances, with senior members of staff present, we've had to have conversations really around we're doing this in the best interest of your child, and we feel that, you know, we feel that this practice will help them. We feel strongly within our values. However, if this is something that, you know, you continue to be upset with, maybe this isn't the place for them. Not once, say today, has anybody come as a parent and said, yeah, you're right, no, it isn't the right place. Because there's been many conversations with parents separately that I've had across my time, you know, whether it's grassroots, whether it's working with the girls, where their frustrations are coming from their own ego and the fact that they wanted to be a pro, they wanted to play football, and that hasn't happened for them. And their dreams, they want to fulfill these dreams through their children. And because that takes over in their mind, they cannot see past that, and they cannot see, actually, I need to stop living my dream through my child and let my child live the dream that they want to live. So it goes back to being firm with your values and firm with your beliefs. And what's really important is having a discussion with the coaching staff in ensuring that they reiterate and reinforce your messages if you are the technical director or the academy manager. Because ultimately, as the person in charge, you can't be there all the time. So when we're disseminating this information, what we need from staff is that they're confident enough to be able to follow suit. And if they're not confident enough, that they come and let us know, because those messages to the parents need to be reinforced. And we want to be bold in ensuring that they are aware that this is in the best interest of their child. And if they are still distressed or upset by it, then perhaps this isn't the environment for them.
Did you find that was more prevalent in grassroots than at the academy level? Because obviously parents understand that there's a certain degree of privilege, I guess, and fortune to being invited to be part of a professional academy, whereas at the grassroots phase, it's like kids can just go wherever and the parents could go anywhere else more easily.
Yeah, and definitely I've experienced it more in grassroots. However, it has been experienced in the professional game, but definitely more in grassroots it's around the culture of what grassroots has looked like for a period of time, and it's trying to break down that culture of the dads coach the teams. Oh, well, my son will just play all the time, and you know that I'll come in 5 minutes before the session. The culture is definitely, particularly say from my experience in the UK, the culture is changing of what grassroots look like, and I think that there's stipulations and regulations in place. I think that there's more campaigning, which is great. The quality of the education for coaches and clubs in grassroots is a lot better, which is really important. But there is still a lot more to be done with regards to the grassroots game, because like I said, with parents, they have a view on how they want their child to be coached and how they feel football is to be played. Because in their view, well, I watch football and I support a team and I look into tactics and analysis. So they think that they're managers. You know, some of them think that they're managers when they're on the touchline. But you have, and I think it goes back to, because there's be a spectrum of coaches, some less confident than others. If you're not so confident in reinforcing the message, that is completely okay. But then go and let somebody know, because if those messages are not reinforced, it will have, we're talking about well-being today, that it will have a detrimental impact on the child, because the one that suffers is the child. You know, that they're constantly getting these mixed messages. that can lower self-esteem. It can affect how they're playing. It can affect their friendships. It can affect their attitude and emotions around wanting to come and play football. And ultimately, that's what we don't want. That we don't want them to lose their love of playing football, being manifested through the behaviours of their parents.
Do you find that, I guess, pretty younger age groups, the children can be super impressionable on the basis of their parents' behaviour? So that reinforcement at that point, if a parent is being, it's called overly enthusiastic in an incorrect manner, those behaviours then manifest themselves in how the child behaves when they get to U15, U16, U17. And if you aren't able to strongly reinforce your values at that point, then that's, I guess, more of a slippery slope for the child as they're seeing that behaviour is not being challenged.
Yeah, I think exactly what you've said. With regards to stages of learning and how children learn, they will manage and be influenced by behaviours externally in different ways. So they may be more influenced the younger they are, but purely because they're still building knowledge of life, and you're going to go on what you're being taught and what you're around, because you actually don't know any different until you start exploring a little bit more. So the more you start exploring as you grow older, the more you become widely aware of, I didn't know that you could see this or do that. And then also, when we think about this, stages of development for different age groups, some of the older ones may just feel a little bit more embarrassed than perhaps some of the younger ones. And some of the older ones might also feel more confident in having a voice to be able to let their parents know that they may not appreciate, them coming to training or games because of their behaviours in comparison to some of the younger ones. So I think it exactly like you said, is very much determined by the stages of learning with regards to the children. Because like I said, the older you are, the more experienced you become in life, and the more you become influenced by your peers and friends, and there are many other contributing factors, as opposed to when you're younger.
And a quick question from Michelle. As coaches, how far should we push a player to open up to us when we feel that he or she is suffering from depression or anxiety? At what point do you consider talking to a specialist rather than trying to convince the player to open up to you?
So I would say, and this is from the perspective of not being the coach, that first of all, we need to be able to let's notice over a period of time. And if we feel that, so if we've noticed that actually there's significant changes and in patterns of behavior or emotions, then there are many factors that we would need to consider. So what we don't know is actually, unless the child has started to speak to us and has opened up, we don't know whether it's to do with external things like family or their parents and that kind of thing. So it's having a conversation. These are things that I've tried and I continue to do. Having a conversation with my assistant coach, making sure things are noted down and dated, having informal conversations with the parents. I'll just notice, and writing down anecdotes. And then if it does become a cause for concern where, like in the question where it's actually, I do feel that there's high anxiety, I do feel that there's signs or symptoms of depression, then it definitely needs to go to a welfare officer or a safeguarding lead and be guided by the core kind of principles of the club, because the club should have a policy or practice in place for this. And you then have enough, sufficient evidence to say, look, I've noticed this is what they were like, you know, 6 weeks ago, however, now, and then it could be a meeting with the parent. I've had that where we've had a meeting with the parents, and it's just been resolved. But, you know, it may be that, and again, we spoke about patience, that the parents have been honest and said, you know, that there's been a bereavement, and it could be then just monitoring behaviour patterns over time. So I think that in terms of stages, ultimately, the first thing is to recognise, is it over a period of time? Is it a cause for concern? If it is, who do I go to at my club? Who's the port of call that I need to speak to, and be guided by their practice? Because ultimately you need to protect yourself as well, and make sure that you're safeguarded when you're dealing with matters that involve welfare.
Yep, perfect. So last question for you, and then we can let you go. Andrew had another question. A quick reaction from coaches and sometimes teachers is to time out or disengage the player or child from the activity when their behaviour is seen as disruptive. Do you have any advice on how to better engage the child in a setting where you are managing both the child and the bigger group? And I guess I would add to that, if that's been the consequence agreed in the core values charter, is it more acceptable if everyone understands that going into it in advance, that will be the consequence of disruptive action that goes counter to the values?
So I think, yes, with regards to if that's been agreed within the values charter, but I think what we also have to consider is how well do we know the individual player? Now, if this is a player, and this is where we would have to, I suppose, and I've done this, where it's almost using your own initiative to say, actually, this doesn't apply to that child. So is this child usually like that? Is it out of turn? Now, if this child is not usually like that, then it's, you know, I guess ourselves, we will know ourselves that, hold on a minute, has something triggered it? Now, I'm not saying that the first thing we would do, because again, it depends on the rapport and the relationship and the context, that the first thing we would do is go up to the child and say, are you okay? That will be determined by the learning environment you've created in order for that to happen. So if this is out of turn, then it may not be that we go to the values charter, because it might be now that we have to have a think and take a breath and say, hold on, we're not quite sure what's triggered this behaviour or triggered this mood. So unless we know that, I think it can become quite challenging. And in terms of engaging them, again, it's around, it would be, what we would have to upskill ourselves on is, okay, why might somebody be disengaged? What are the contributing factors around that? So, for example, if it's right, they've had a disruptive relationship with one of their friends. Okay, right, we know that, we're going to try and solve that. Is it because are we aware of something that's happened at home that's triggering their behaviour? Is it attention seeking, and what's manifested for them to want to seek attention? And if it is, I'll give you an example. When I was teaching, and we had a physical education lesson, and with this particular child, it was attention seeking. And one of the strategies that I used with him was continuing with the session and almost ignoring some of his behaviours. Now, of course, if it became a cause for concern, then I was going to deal with it straight away. But in this case, it was almost ignoring his shouting, ignoring the disruption. And the more I started to do that, the more he knew that actually I wasn't going to keep saying his name. So I'm not saying that ignore is the only strategy, because again, it was determined by what I knew of him and his behaviours. But there's so many facets to it that we would have to really break down like learning behaviours and what that looks like. But in a nutshell, to your answer, it I wouldn't necessarily go to the values charter straight away. What I would first need to do is determine what's the context around why he's or she is reacting and behaving in that way, and then make an informed decision based on that.
Perfect. And I think that was the last question we had. I know a lot of questions came. But,
Sean, sorry, can I just add one more thing just on
yeah,
that?
go ahead.
So, you know, with regards to engaging, things that I have tried with trying to engage are using like peer buddies. So we use this when, for example, we've got new players coming into the group, but somebody who's not you as the adult, who within the group, a bit like, you know, in school, not sure if they do this in years where we have school counsellors, where it's the school council are the ones, you know, they're the ones who will make the decisions. That it'd be no different to having, I don't know, like a player council, or players who would take on the responsibility of maybe, you know, making sure that information that you would like is disseminated, and then that information might be player care. It might be, you know, around that whole aspect of just check if she, you know, he or she is okay. Is there a problem? And sometimes the players are more likely to talk to the players than they are to us. So I think in terms of engaging, we can maybe be a little bit more creative with how we do that, as opposed to, you know, kind of using the exclusion factor of, right, you're just going to sit on the side because you're being disruptive. It's, you know, using the players to talk to each other and build that relationship, focusing on the players' strengths and what we know that they're good at. And again, and I mentioned this when we were talking about the parents and the values charter. It's really challenging for teachers, for coaches or youth professionals to be consistent if we keep getting negative connotations coming back to us. But we have to do that, because it's, you know, there's a lot of talk, for instance, around deliberate practice. Through deliberate practice, we can improve mechanics and technique and other things. But through our deliberate practice on reinforcing our core values and expectations, we can try and best engage with the players. And that'd be no different to a player who may appear to be disengaged for whatever reason. To keep reinforcing the message of, I know you can do it, I've seen you do it, I saw you do that last week, look at that shot that you took, or you know, or whatever it might be. But I think definitely reinforcing, using the players to help each other, and having that learning environment that allows for that to happen.
Perfect. Thank you for that, Manisha, and thank you for everything from today. It was fascinating, and I'm hoping that everyone else found it as interesting and engaging as I certainly did. So thank you again for your time, and thank you all guys for joining us. Manisha's information is on the screen still, so if you want to reach out to her, I'm sure she's happy to answer any questions you guys have.
Yeah, absolutely.
Thanks, Manisha, and bye all.
Thank you.